Well, shalom, my name is Todd Bennett, and this is the audio recording of the weekly Shema Israel newsletter titled Listening to the Voice of Elohim. This picture here is one that I took on my recent trip to Saudi Arabia, and it's from inside Elijah's cave looking down at where the camp of Israel was. And if you looked really closely, you could see the altar of the golden calf and a campsite where Israel was. And it's just a really, really incredible place to visit. Well, anyways, it has to do with the theme of this weekly message, which was originally sent out on day 2 of month 4 on the Creator's calendar, also known as June 28th, 2025. On the Roman calendar. Last week, I reminded people about the fact that even though we have passed beyond Shavuot, the counting continues. We also spoke about the powerful voice of Yahuwah that shook people to the core on Shavuot. Here's a description of that voice when Moses took the people to meet Elohim. It was a formal introduction before the wedding ceremony. It says, on the morning of the 3rd day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and very loud shofar blasts so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet Elohim, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because Yahuwah had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the shofar grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and Elohim answered him in thunder. Yahuwah came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. And Yahuwah called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And Yahuwah said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to Yahuwah to look, and many of them perish. Also let the priests who come near to Yahuwah consecrate themselves, lest Yahuwah break out against them. And Moses said to Yahuwah, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you yourself warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain and consecrate it. And Yahuwah said to him, go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to Yahuwah, lest he break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. Now, I thought it's interesting, I pointed this out before, that he has priests. He's mentioning priests. Well, who are these priests? Because there were no Levites appointed as priests until after the fact, after the golden calf incident. So, I haven't got there yet. So who are these priests? Well, it's interesting that the priests were essentially in the Melchizedek line, the firstborn of the tribes and the people acted as priests, and that's who we would have seen slaughtering the lambs in Egypt for the Passover. So the firstborn were generally the priests of their household. Now here are the words that were spoken. I am Yahuwah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me or in my face. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, Yahuwah your Elohim, am a jealous Elohim, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to their 3rd and the 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to those thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. So again, that's Yeshua said, if you love me, keep my commandments, and that is an expression of our love, is if we actually keep his commandments. You shall not take the name of Yahweh your Elohim in vain, for Yahuwah will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain or brings it to naught. And remember the Sabbath day to keep it set apart. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to Yahuwah your Elohim. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. And of course, there's this tradition that a lot of Jewish people have is their Sabbath goy. Okay, they have somebody come and flip on their light switch, and they profane the Sabbath, but because they're goy, these people believe that it's okay. Well, it's strictly forbidden. There's no work to occur within your gates, no matter who it is. For in 6 days Yahuwah made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore Yahuwah blessed the Sabbath day and made it set apart. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that Yahuwah your Elohim is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now, did you notice the first thing Yahweh did was tell them his name? These words were all about establishing a relationship and setting an order in that relationship. And we could spend weeks reviewing each of these statements made by Yahweh, and maybe we can do that at a later date. For now, it's important to examine the people's response to this mighty voice that was spoken directly from Yah, from the mountain. It says, now when all the people saw the et thunder, and the et lightning flashes, and the et sound of the shofar, and the et mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off, and said to Moses, you speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let Elohim speak to us, lest we die. Moses said to the people, do not fear, for Elohim has come to test you, that the fear of Elohim, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off, while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where Elohim was. Again, it's hard to imagine a physical experience by just reading words. Psalm 29 gives a description of the magnitude of that event, and we provided that last week. And the Torah seems to indicate that the people didn't just hear the words, but also saw the sounds with their eyes. It was as if the frequencies and vibrations and the reverberations and the trembling mountain, all of this, these aspects of the sound were literally visible. Of course, why not? This was the same voice that sounded at the beginning and proclaimed, let there be light, or rather, light exist. Those first words uttered by Elohim resulted in something visible. In fact, I believe that those words never stopped creating. Is it possible that they're continuing to create even now? Does that explain what scientists believe to be an expanding universe? Well, I find it amazing that people are willing to believe in a big bang instead of a big voice. How can you get a big bang without explaining the forces and matter that were involved in that bang? Where did the matter and energy come from? Well, that evolutionary anti-religion takes an awful lot of faith, and in the end it leads to a cold, dark, lonely, and depressing ending. Why would anybody choose such a hopeless belief system, especially in light of the amazing physical universe in which we exist and all the evidences of creation and intelligent design and all that? I much prefer the understanding that it was all created in the beginning and spoken into existence by a loving creator who designed us for a special purpose with an incredible destiny. That not only makes perfect sense based on the beauty and complexities of design built into creation at the microscopic level, but it also is filled with hope. And I say hallelujah to that, for the hope that we're given. Well, the reason Yahweh used such a loud and powerful voice at Sinai was to test Israel, like he'd been testing on their journey out of Egypt. He wanted to find out if they really trusted him. Did they really think that Yahweh was going to kill them with his voice after he'd provided for them, delivered them, fed them, gave them water, and led them all the way to the mountain? Did they really think he was going to kill them? Well, everything he did was for their own good. He delivered them, protected them, provided for them all along the way. Indeed, we know that when Yahweh appeared to the children of Israel at the mountain, it was covered with a thick, dark cloud. And that was actually done to protect them. From everything that went on at Sinai, I believe that Yahweh actually opened up a dimensional portal connecting heaven and earth. Now, that's my opinion only, but it makes perfect sense. The mountain became holy ground, and thus the people were unable to look upon Yahweh or go near the mountain, lest they die. It became set apart, and that's why the people needed to be ritually purified and could not go near it or touch it. They were unable to look upon the kavod of Yahweh that closely. In fact, that's the very same concept that we see in the Holy of Holies in the temple. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was located. It was the throne room where Yahweh was seated. And when the high priest entered on Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonements, Yom HaKippurim, that's what it's really called, the Day of Atonements, the room needed to be filled with incense in order to cover the mercy seat. Otherwise, he would die. Well, after Yahweh spoke 10 proclamations from the mountain, the people asked him to stop. So Moses went up to listen to the rest of the words and then transmit those words to the people. And that makes us think about another count. If we are following in real time, so to speak, it's been 25 days since Moses ascended the mountain as we proceed past Shavuot. Now we know that he was going to be there for 40 days and 40 nights. We know that now, and as they say, hindsight is 20/20. With the benefit of hindsight, we know when Moses was going to descend, but the people down below didn't have a clue, not even Aaron. They ended up getting impatient, and they failed to heed the words spoken by Yahweh regarding idols and foreign gods in his face, and they made an Egyptian god and placed it before Yahweh's face as he was on the mountain speaking to Moses. Well, several months ago, I visited that place and examined the evidence of their idolatry. And I also ascended the mountain and visited what is commonly called Elijah's Cave on the Sinai Ridge. And interestingly, it may actually be a cave that Moses first visited. I often entertain the thought that while both Elijah and Moses were up on the mountain, maybe that was when they visited with Yeshua while he was on another mountain, often called the Mount of Transfiguration. We read about that in Matthew 17, 1 through 8, when Yeshua was up on the mountain with Peter, James, and John. And I believe that was Mount Hermon, which could likely have been another sort of portal location, because in First Enoch we read that that's where the fallen angels actually made a covenant. And so, anyways, is it possible that, at different times when Moses and Elijah went up into that cave, that was when they converged and met with Yeshua on the Mount of Transfiguration? So it's just an opinion of mine, and something interesting. And although I wasn't transported while I was at the cave, but it's one of those questions I look forward to asking if I have the opportunity to meet the resurrected individuals involved in that encounter. Sometimes it's interesting to think about how these things actually happened in the spirit realm. Well, in any event, that's just a thought I have. Although there's no specific mention of any time that Moses might have spent in the cave, there is a mention of him being in the cleft of the rock, which could mean a cave as well. Well, there is a scripture that describes Elijah's time in the cave, and it's interesting that the focus was on the voice of Elohim. And let's examine that event. It says, "And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, 'So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time.' And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Yehudah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die and said, "It is enough. Now, Yahweh, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Then he lay and slept under a broom tree. Suddenly an angel or messenger touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of Yahweh came back the second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." So he arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. And there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of Yahweh came to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elisha?" So he said, "I have been very zealous for Yahweh Elohim of hosts. For the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with a sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Then he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before Yahweh." And behold, Yahweh passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before Yahweh. But Yahuwah was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But Yahweh was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. So it was, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very zealous for Yahweh Elohim of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Then Yahweh said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king of Syria. Also you shall anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi as king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place. It shall be that whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill, and whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. Yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." Of course, it's not only the location that harkens back to Moses, and that's why I made the connection with the cave and Mount Sinai, but also the mention of 40 days and 40 nights. Remember that Moses heard the first 10 words from the mighty voice of Yahweh, just like all the other Israelites. He later ascended and fasted on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and during those 40 days and nights, he heard the remaining words. It was also during that time when the Israelites below fell into idolatry. The bride was having an affair during the betrothal process. So we're supposed to relate this back to the children of Israel who were brought there for a wedding ceremony. The question is, why was Elijah there? Indeed, that was a question that Yahweh had for Elijah. Here's his response again. "I have been very zealous for Yahweh Elohim of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Well, it was more of a statement than an answer, but basically Elijah was stating that he was the only one left in the covenant relationship with Yahweh. He believed that everyone else had departed, despite what had just happened at Carmel. We read about that in 1 Kings 18, which was an incredible display of the power of Yahweh when Yahweh defeated Baal in the sight of the people, and then Elijah basically ordered the killing of the priests of Baal, which then led to this whole incident of the threat from Jezebel. And that was what drove him to the place of the covenant for protection. Well, Yahweh then gave Elijah the same pyrotechnic display that the children of Israel experienced when they camped before the mountain. Yet he was not in the wind, he was not in the earthquake or the fire. Now, instead of a shofar blast, Yahweh was in a still small voice. In Hebrew, we read kol damama daka, and kol means voice or sound, and damama means quiet, still, or silent. And daka means small, thin, or very little. So instead of the sound of a loud, thundering shofar blast, the voice of Yahweh was a quiet whisper. It was the exact opposite of what the children of Israel had experienced at Sinai. Yahweh was showing Elijah something profound and important. He gave Elijah what he came for, but he wasn't in any of it. It specifically revealed that Yahweh wasn't there to appease the expectations of Elijah. And this is an extremely important message for our time. Yahweh may very well give people what they want and what they expect, and even though he's not in it, he clearly allows things to happen that he is not in. In other words, just because something happens, it doesn't mean it's his express will or that you should be involved in it. For example, he might allow the Zionists to establish a nation called Israel, but he's not there dwelling with them. He may allow Christians and Jews to build another temple. It may seem to be a miracle, but it doesn't mean that he will dwell in it. It could just be a test. I can see today that many people are primed for deception because they're looking for excitement, drama, and even entertainment. They have prophetic expectations fed to them by Jesuits and dispensationalists and evangelical preachers. Some or all of these expectations may actually happen, but again, it doesn't mean that Yahweh is in it. The only way to know is if you listen to the voice of Elohim. And the sad thing is that many are not listening for the still small voice, and some don't want to hear it anyway. In this noisy world that we live in, it's often hard to discern a whisper. There are a lot of churches that need to get this message. They're trying to recreate something from the past. They're looking for an experience, but they're missing the voice of Elohim amidst all of the noise. When Elijah arrived at the mountain, he was asked by Yahweh, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" In other words, why did you come to this place? What are you expecting? It's interesting that Yahweh fed Elijah and enabled him to get there. And I'm sure after all of that, Elijah must have thought there was going to be something powerful at the end of the journey. It must have been a bit surprising to hear the question. Elijah traveled all that way looking for answers, and he was fed and nourished only to be met with a question. That's something we all need to consider. How did we get to the place where we find ourselves, and why are we here? What are we looking for, and what are we expecting? Are we prepared to hear and receive the message that Yahweh has for us, or do we just want him to fulfill our expectations? Yahweh wanted Elijah to be circumspect and assess what was driving him. Why was he running for his life? Again, at that point, Elijah was a very unique prophet who operated in power, yet his journey was motivated by fear and assumptions. The guy who commanded the weather, raised people from the dead, multiplied food, confronted the priests of Baal, and called down fire from heaven, had actually succumbed to fear. He let a death threat from a witch affect him. He assumed he was the only prophet of Israel remaining, and apparently fled to preserve his life. And that's a problem that many of us experience. We live our lives based upon certain assumptions that may or may not be accurate. We often only see things from our limited perspective, and let's face it, we can also become very self-centered. Ultimately, it's not about our individual survival or proving that we are right to the world. Our existence is about shining the light of Yahweh to the world. Now that is a distinction with a very important difference. I see many people, ministries, churches, and assemblies that compartmentalize themselves and become self-promoting, which can then cause them to lose focus. And that's why I've always generally opposed church buildings, because I've seen the building become the focus instead of Yahweh. Sometimes it's all about the pastor, and it ends up like a cult. Many times people limit their relationships to just within their church, even though their next door neighbors are believers. Yeshua didn't stay in one town and only preach to one group of people from one building. He went to the people and spread the good news. He was a king, but he didn't have a palace or a mansion. Yet we live in a culture that places great importance on building our own individual kingdoms. I remember years ago there was my father had this book called The Kingdom of Self, and it was really a good concept because it just talked about the fact that ever since we're raised as babies, we have that understanding that people are there to serve us, that we get our diapers changed when we have a dirty diaper. They take care of all our bathroom needs. When we're hungry, we cry and we get a bottle stuck in our mouth. And, when we're uncomfortable, we cry and people come running to our attention. And so we can, grow up with that notion that the world revolves around us, and we can have a tendency to build a kingdom of self. And so we have to be careful that we are in the kingdom of Yahuwah and we serve him, and it's not the other way around. We just look at him there to serve us. And it's important to remember that we were created for a purpose that transcends our individual lives and existence. We're all just grains of sand in the hourglass of time. We have a limited existence in which to make a choice and demonstrate whether we live we'll live the lives that Yah planned for us. We're individual pieces in a grand cosmic puzzle, and only Yahuwah sees the entire picture. The universe does not revolve around us, and every action that Yahuwah takes is not to make our lives easier or more comfortable. It's all about him and his plan. The only question is, how do we fit into it, and whether we're willing to accept that role and fulfill our purpose within his plan. The event described in 1 Kings begins with amazing drama, builds up to a crescendo, and then comes to a very abrupt ending. It really encapsulates the life of Elijah. You see, just as the thundering shofar was meant to test the children of Israel, so was the still small voice that spoke to Elijah. Yahuwah was testing Elijah. That's why he asked Elijah a second time, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He wanted to know if Elijah understood the lesson. Sadly, Elijah gave the same answer. He didn't quite get it. And as a result, Elijah was essentially given his notice. His mission had come to an end, and he was being replaced. He was given his final instructions, including the naming of his predecessor. At the end, we read Yahuwah essentially stating, "Oh, by the way, Elijah, you were wrong. I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." So in other words, there were plenty of others. He wasn't the only one. So he was acting based upon a presumption and assumption that he had to preserve his life because he was the only one, and yet he didn't fully understand what Yah was doing, and he didn't have all the information, and Yah had reserved 7,000 others in Israel. So the moral of the story is that if we don't stay attentive and keep listening, we can stray off the path and lose our focus. Yahuwah is often interested in doing a new thing when we simply want him to repeat the past. And that's why I repeatedly advise people to remain eschatologically flexible as we proceed into the future. Last week I mentioned people's expectations concerning Ezekiel 38, and the diverse positions people take are incredible. Futurists, full preterists, partial preterists, there's even full preterists, amillennialists, and the list goes on of eschatological camps, and it seems endless. And as people label themselves based upon their expectations, they may be inadvertently removing themselves from participating in the future plans of Yahuwah. They may find themselves getting their pink slips, like Elijah, because they're either unable or unwilling to hear the voice of Elohim. They've gone into a cave surrounded by their own thoughts, desires, and expectations, and are unwilling to let go of them. Many have built a self-centered view of Yahweh's plan for the future, which makes them irrelevant or unable to be used by Yahweh any longer. That's why I emphasize the appointed time so much. They keep us focused on the covenant path. We aren't just remembering the past, we're also rehearsing for the future, and we need to approach them not simply through our learned traditions, but with an ear to hear the voice of Elohim. We should be seeking his ways and making sure we're walking in synchronicity with his will. If we do that, then the appointed times lead us into the future and take out all the guesswork. There are currently many people trying to find a prophetic meaning in every worldwide event that they read about as they await the rapture. The simple fact is that there's much more going on than you read in the news or view on social media. You're only being provided with limited information, and oftentimes that information is filled with lies and deceptions. So it's a fool's errand to try to figure it all out based upon what you hear from the world. Elisha thought he knew the current condition of the covenant people, but he was woefully mistaken. And the lesson of Elijah is that we don't know the totality of the plan of Yahuwah, nor do we need to know everything he's doing. We simply need to turn down the volume in our own lives and listen. Whether it's the blast of a shofar or a quiet whisper, we must continue to listen to the voice of Elohim. Barakot, my name is Todd Bennett from ShemaIsrael.net. Shalom.